Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another episode of Coach Cody Podcast. I'm a little thrown off. I'm recording this on a Saturday, which I normally record on Sundays, but I'm having a new AC unit installed in my apartment tomorrow because mine's been going out. Funny, I'm finally getting a new AC unit when the temperatures were not as hot as Satan's ballsack, but I guess it's a blessing in disguise because it's going to take them about 8 hours to install. And going 8 hours without air conditioning in triple digit heat, not my idea of a fun time. But anyways, I don't know why I'm talking about the weather. I hate talking about the weather because I am not good at small talk, I guess, unless I'm kind of talking to myself or, I can't see y'all listening to this or watching this, so it feels like I'm talking to myself. But if you enjoy small talk, well, you're welcome. If you don't, I apologize. So, I don't know if there's been quite a news cycle lately. So, we had the attempted assassination, we had Biden dropping out, and now we at least have the Olympics. I feel like it's a little, we had the Olympics. I felt like that was going to be a little mood booster for everyone in the world, all coming together, just competing, sports, competition, sportsmanship, good times. But that all ended when the opening ceremony happened. And let's just say Christians are mad, real mad. Apparently, you know what? I didn't even watch the opening ceremony, I'm gonna be real. But even though I didn't watch it and had no idea what was going on, I feel like I'm still to blame for what occurred. And there's different, takes on what the opening ceremony represented. Of course, Christian side of things, it's a mockery of Christianity in the Last Supper. Other side of things, it was not related. I'll have to research more, in general, I'll have to research more, but I already tried. But I got on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, and let's just say it wasn't great for my mental health to be on there today. Like, just when you think that trans people couldn't possibly be hated more or couldn't possibly be blamed for anything more, they find something. And granted, this is France, and I mean, I had no hand in what occurred. Some things you don't get credit for, even though you wish you did, and some things you don't want credit for, but they're just going to give it to you anyways. But, so there's some boycotts of the Olympics going on. I hope they, maybe we will be boycotting French fries again. I don't know if you remember, maybe you're too young, maybe not, I don't know. But back in the day, they're boycotting French fries because the French did not want to participate in our wars, something along those lines. So we renamed them Freedom Fries for a bit. It never stuck, obviously, because it was fucking awful. And we are back to French fries. So chances are we will be back to the Olympics within about 2 seconds. But also, again, in 4 years, no one is boycotting the Olympics. That's a stupid thing to say. Like, how do you boycott the Olympics? Especially you just pull your team out. No, that's not happening. We need... our athletes deserve to be in the Olympics competing for something they've worked their whole lives on. But anyways, I just find it funny that people put so much weight in something like an opening ceremony and get all outraged about it. And they, make fun of anyone, in the LGBT community for being a snowflake or overly sensitive. Yet, here we are. I feel like, I don't know. I don't mean to be political. I think I'm just fed up. And everything is political right now. So I apologize for even talking about it. We will move on. But anyways, I wanted to talk today, not about politics, not about outrage and boycotting, but I would be here for boycotting ultra palatable processed foods. That might sound a little bit rigid, a little extreme as well. I guess, it's probably never a good thing to boycott anything, but you can make a personal choice to abstain from it or to moderate it in order to fit your goals, lifestyle, health. First, so I want to talk about why it is so hard to stop overeating or eating quote unquote junk food in general, or highly palatable, ultra processed foods, those foods that are so processed that you cannot make them at home because you would need certain chemicals and stuff in order to do so. And the foods that are designed to make you essentially addicted, make it so it's so hard to stop eating because they are designed to make you want to keep eating. Before I dive into the why behind that, why it's so hard to stop eating them, and then how you might, stop eating them, I wanted to dive into a study specifically about ultra-processed foods and the correlation of increased risk of metabolic syndrome. So let's do this. Let's dive into the study. So what was studied? The association between, I just burped there. That was hot. Sorry about that. Excuse me. Let's start again. What was studied? The association between ultra-processed foods intake and the risk of metabolic syndrome. So who was studied? 22,688 men and women ages greater than 19 in Korea. I always like to know how they pick where, I guess it depends where the funds are. So in Korea we're studying men and women. How was it studied? In this cross-sectional study, the percentage of total food intake in grams from UPF, aka ultra processed food, was calculated from a 24-hour dietary recall. UPFs were classified using the NOVA food classification system. Metabolic syndrome was diagnosed based on the criteria of the National Cholesterol Education Program Adult Treatment Panel with modified waist circumference cutoff adjusted for Korean adults. A diagnosis of metabolic syndrome required at least 3 of the following conditions: fasting glucose greater than 100, HDL cholesterol less than 40 milligrams per deciliter. Sorry, really sounding educated here. For men, and less than 50 milligrams for women. Triglycerides greater than 150 milligrams per deciliter. Waist circumference greater than 90 centimeters, which is about 35 inches for men, and greater than 85 centimeters, which is 33 inches for women. So what were the results? After adjusting for age and sex, a higher percentage of UPF was associated with an increased risk of metabolic syndrome. Shocker. The participants in the highest quartile, highest 25% of participants of ultra-processed food intake had 19% higher odds of developing metabolic syndrome than the participants in the lowest quartile did. So what else do we need to know about this study? The participants with higher percentages of ultra-processed food intake were more likely to also have higher intakes of fat, saturated fat, sodium, sugar, and riboflavin, as well as lower intakes of carbohydrates, dietary fiber, folic acid, iron, potassium, and vitamin C. So it looks like, shocker, the consumption of ultra-processed foods is correlated with an increased risk of metabolic syndrome. And you know why? It's because it's so easy to overeat them. If you have them in moderation, it's not as much of a problem. But the problem is it's really hard to eat these foods in moderation, especially when we use them to cope. We're emotional eaters. We're stress eating. What do you reach for when you're feeling emotional, or you're feeling stressed, or even when you're feeling happy? A lot of times we're thinking about some sort of ultra-processed food, whether we're celebrating or whether we're stress eating. They're delicious, and I'm going to explain why. They are designed to be delicious, and I guess this is one way I could say, it's not just you. It's not your fault, because they are designed to be this way. They're essentially designed to be addictive. So that being said, of course, we still have responsibility of, what we choose to eat. It is a choice of what we decide to put in our bodies, but it is not always we only have so much willpower, and it's not always within us to stop eating these things because, again, designed to be addictive. So, understanding junk food cravings. Why do we crave them? So, Hyperpalatable foods. These are engineered to be irresistible with the perfect blend of sugar, fat, and salt. I like to call this the perfect trio. When these three things are involved, it is really hard to stop eating. And this is also something, so I went to culinary school, if you didn't know. Most dishes that are delicious, they are going to have these three things: sugar, fat, and salt. And you'd be surprised what actually does contain some sugar. And it's not any of these ingredients alone that make things addictive. Salt is not addictive. Sugar is not addictive. Fat is not addictive. Carbs are not addictive. Well, sugar is a carb. But it's the combination of these things, three things together. It is like an orgasm in your mouth. That sounded weird. But that's why it's so hard to stop eating. Anyways, so food industry tactics. Companies use science and marketing to create addictive products. They literally have scientists that they hire to try to create more addictive foods. Potato chips, they are designed for you not to be able to just have one. If you've just had one, if you're able to have one potato chip, it's because someone took the bag away from you and told you no. It's never something that we do on our own. Even if it's one of those things where you grab a chip from the cupboard because you're just kind of passing by and you're like, I just feel like something salty real quick. I'm just gonna snack on a chip. Chances are, whether it's 30 seconds or a minute later, you're coming back for another chip. And before you know it, you grab the bag because you just want more, right? So anyways, there's also a pretty big impact when it comes to marketing. They know how to market. Like there is scientists who design the food to be addictive, there are also, experts in psychology and marketing that know how the human brain works. So they make sure to advertise things very sneaky, very much so directed to their consumers. So ads and packaging are designed to make junk food appealing and hard to resist. The sad part is a lot of this marketing, I don't know if you've noticed, is geared towards children. So we're starting them young. But also, if you go down the cereal aisle, let's be specific here. What are the worst food, like the worst cereals that you see in that cereal aisle? They are at child's eyesight, child's height, right? The healthier ones, generally up high. So the adults are the ones that can see them. Except if you're short like me, I still gotta look up. But that's where the healthier cereals are above, where kids are not even, it's not even a kid's viewpoint. So the kids cereals, they have cartoon characters on them. They have your kid's favorite superhero, your kid's favorite cartoon. It's very appealing because they're thinking, oh, I don't know cartoons these days. I was a Rugrats person. Or let's just go back into the days of Frosted Flakes. We got Tony the Tiger. Who doesn't want Tony the Tiger? Or he is big and strong because he eats Frosted Flakes. Not nutritious, guys. So also, Lucky Charms. We've got bright colors. We've got a little leprechaun. It's very appealing to children. Bright things, sugar. Of course, children are going to want it. Same with candy being, at the checkout lanes. Who do you think is going to be standing there asking their parents for candy while waiting to check out? Kids. Of course, it's going to get adults too. Big kids as well, grown-up kids, because it's that hard to resist. Not only are they great at marketing things on the packages of food, but they're very specific about where they're placing things in the stores. So that's another thing to look at when you're in the grocery store next. Observe how things are placed. They will put things in certain ways to make it more appealing. We've got those case stacks when it's like shouting sale at you. That's one thing. But we've got most of the highly palatable processed foods in direct line of sight. All right. And the grocery store checkout lane is also where you're standing the longest because you're waiting forever. So it's a lot harder to resist. You can't just pass by. You're waiting. And we have cell phones now, so a lot of times, people's heads are buried in the phones, but then you open your phone And it probably knows that I swear to God, it probably knows you're staring at a candy ad because you'll get ads. So tricky. Anyways, so let's move on to the science behind overeating. So evolutionary preferences. Our ancestors craved high-calorie foods for survival, a trait that still persists today, even though food is all around us and readily available. There's a reason that we find fat, salt, sugar so appealing, because it's high in calories. And back in the day, anything high calorie meant survival. You could survive longer because you had food to eat. Now, we do not need high calorie foods. We are constantly eating. We don't have to hunt. We're not even exercising to get our food. We can literally have it brought to us anywhere. I mean, unless you live out in the middle of nowhere, it's a little harder. Then, hey, you might have a farm. You might grow your own food, which is awesome. But if you're in the suburbs, if you're in the city, if you're even a little bit outside the city, you can get things delivered. So we're not even expending energy hunting down our foods. We are literally more sedentary now than ever, and we have more food available than ever. It's a combination. It's a really bad recipe for disease, and puts you at risk for obesity. So, our brain wiring. Our brains release dopamine in response to junk food, kind of like drugs, addiction, reinforcing the craving cycle. So, that's one thing. We do have a chemical response to highly palatable processed foods. We get a hit of dopamine. It gives us a moment of relief, of calm, of stress reduction, and then it starts that cycle. When you're stressed, you need a dopamine hit. You want to reach for that highly palatable processed food because it's going to give you a momentary high, essentially, and it's going to make you feel better for a second. But you have to remember, it's just for a second. Once that food is gone, your problems are going to come back. Your stress is going to come back. And a lot of the times, it's 10 times worse because you now feel guilty. You now feel the shame. And I'm not saying that you should feel that way, because it ends up just kind of making the cycle worse and makes it even hard to get out of. Because when you feel the shame and the guilt, then you're stressed. And then you want another hit to get rid of that shame and guilt. And it's just a vicious cycle. So it's going to take a different way of coping with stress. And it's also hard to just break those habits because it is it's not a quick fix, but it does help in the moment. There's a reason we do it, right? It's not a good way. It's not a long-term solution, but it does help in the moment. But unfortunately, it has health consequences. So the craving cycle, the combination of craving, indulging, and guilt creates a reinforcing loop of overeating. So like I explained, yes, it does create that loop, and it's really, really hard to get out of. So now we can talk about the impacts of overeating junk food. And so as far as health consequences goes, regular consumption leads to obesity, diabetes, heart disease, all the metabolic syndrome, like any sort of metabolic disease is mostly associated with being overweight, obese, that sort of thing. Those are all going to be risk factors when you are overeating junk food. It's just an unfortunate truth. And that's why moderation is key. But I will say, I won't go on that tangent yet. I'll save that for later. But the emotional effects of overeating junk food, it's like I said, feelings of shame and guilt and loss of control. So it doesn't come without consequence, both emotionally and physically. And I think that is something to remind yourself of if you're someone who tends to reach for junk food in those moments that you're looking for relief. So, all right. So strategies to regain control when it comes to eating these highly palatable processed foods. Number one being mindful eating practices. So focus on eating slowly and savoring each bite to reduce overeating. This comes with, not only if you're trying to eat these foods in moderation, but with, whole foods in general, your meals. Try not to eat distracted. Try to be present when you're eating. pay attention to the texture, the taste, the different notes. Pretend you're in culinary school and you're trying to figure out how to make a dish. You're testing it out, and or you're preparing a dish for your chef, and you want them to make sure it tastes fine. And of course, you're going to go and you're going to taste it first, so you can make sure things are all on par. So just pretend each meal is a taste test, and you want to make sure everything's all right. Pay attention to how that food is tasting. I don't know if that made sense at all. Just pay attention to your food, texture, taste. Try to enjoy it in that moment. Don't eat distracted. I know it's hard because a lot of us eat while we're working now. A lot of us are scrolling the news with politics. So it's really hard to not be distracted while you're eating, but try your hardest, all right? So another way to avoid it is to improve your meal quality. That means improve your quality of food. So eating more vegetables, fruits, lean meats, those are the things that are going to prevent overeating as much because you're going to be more full. And it's actually funny because I've worked with a lot of people when it comes to fitness and nutrition, and a lot of folks find it very surprising when they switch from eating a lot of processed foods over to a more whole food based diet. They're way less hungry, sometimes even too full, while still being in a calorie deficit. And then they start to question, is it going to work? Because they don't feel hungry enough. And that's the magic of eating less processed food. All food is processed to a certain extent. Even chicken breast, obviously it's been processed. It's been killed, it's been plucked, it's been cut into breasts. So although chicken breast would be considered like a whole food, everything is slightly processed. I'm talking about the ultra processed. So chicken breasts that would be ultra processed would be considered like a chicken nugget, right? Okay. So another thing I think is huge, very huge, is setting boundaries. So create rules around food choices, such as limiting junk food to special occasions. And I think we have a big, there's like a stigma right now, or there has been for a while, about setting boundaries around food. I think especially during COVID, we kind of all just gave ourselves permission to cope however we needed, because it was a lot. It was a lot to handle, and we had to do what we had to do to not lose our minds. I'm sorry, I'm a little thirsty here. Okay, that's better. So we have relationships with food, right? Whether it's healthy, not healthy, but just like we have a relationship with food, we also have just like we have a relationship with people, we also have a relationship with food. And we have healthy relationships with people, not so healthy relationships, some codependency, that sort of thing. The same goes with food. And any healthy relationship comes with boundaries. You know, even if you absolutely love the person, if there is something that you 100% do not feel comfortable with, or you know is going to either drain you or impact yourself negatively, it's okay to set a boundary and you can say no, right? The same comes to food. Just because you say no to something doesn't mean you're being restrictive, doesn't mean that it's an eating disorder because you're saying no to XYZ food. I think we're very quick to jump to something being an eating disorder if we say no. And there's a difference between restriction and restraint. Restriction says, no, I can't have that. Restraint says, I think I'll have that at another time. So that's a boundary. It's just saying, I think I'll pass for now. It's completely healthy. It's okay. All right. So moving on from that, some more strategies. So reduce exposure. So if you have a certain food in your house that you know you struggle with and you just cannot stop eating it, do not keep it in the house. We do not have finite willpower. We only have so much. So if you're passing by that thing and you know it's there, every single time you pass by it and you want a piece of it, the more chance is that you're going to just give in, because we cannot say no forever. So keeping it out of sight, out of mind, out of house, if possible, is going to set yourself up for success a lot more. And it's going to be a lot easier to not just dive headfirst into whatever food it is that you have a hard time not eating. Those foods without breaks, right? The ones where you're eating it and you're telling yourself to stop and you just can't. Those are dangerous. You got to keep those out of the house if you know that you struggle with them. So another thing we can do is find healthier alternatives. And I know this kind of has its own stigma because there's a lot of, I feel like, healthy cookie recipes or like healthy baked goods that they're sufficient. But at the same time, there's some things that just shouldn't really be made healthy, whereas we have to consider that they're different. I don't know, trying to like I've definitely had my run of trying to healthify cookies, and some were decent, but at the end of the day, you're a lot of the times the cravings, it just doesn't work and you end up still going for whatever it is you're craving in the first place. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it can be like a good little bridge to transition from like eating a lot of ultra processed foods to kind of like bring it down a little bit. So you kind of have to gauge what works best for you. I know sometimes even when we create like healthy alternatives, then we just end up overeating that and binging on that. So you just gotta know, what works best for you. And there's still that mindset behind it of like going to that food for comfort. And of course there's a place and time for that, but you just know where you're at, know if it's helpful for you. If it just triggers you more, then it might be even more helpful to just kind of remove that sort of thing for at least a temporary amount of time. But I guess one way that I will say I do healthy alternatives that does work for me. So I do have a sweet tooth and I always need something sweet after dinner. So instead of having cookies or something that's highly palatable and processed, I will have something called Boggs. It's it's cream of rice, but it's flavored. And there's this company called Flavor Gang. I'm not sponsored by them. I just really like their products. I use them. They're lifesavers. They've got great low-calorie sauces. They taste delicious, and they have good kind of like, lower calorie alternatives. So this is where I'm like, green light, yes. Because when you have these ones, it doesn't leave you searching for more still, because it is pretty darn good. So Bowl of Gains is what Bog stands for, and it's just cream of rice, cocoa powder, and some it's got artificial sweetener. That's its own little controversial thing, but I will say there's no studies to back up that they cause cancer or anything like that. Moderation is key, blah blah blah. We're not talking about artificial sweeteners today, but it's lower calorie, it tastes delicious, it really hits that sweet tooth, especially chocolate. And if you know that you're going to crave something sweet at night, no matter what you do, an alternative might be a good option. And then there's also fruit, and you can train yourself to kind of reset your palate. This is something that I think about quite often because, I've done my fair share of Whole30s. I know that's like, it's controversy in and of itself. So Whole30, if you're not familiar, basically you're eating whole foods for 30 days. Really no ultra processed, much of anything besides maybe like some nut butters. But even that, kind of gotta be careful in that because they can be food without breaks. But when you remove if you remove the combinations of like fat, sugar, and what was it? Sorry, brain farting real bad here. Sugar, fat, and salt. Cool. Yeah, I need some coffee or something. But when you remove those from your diet in combination in not like an ultra processed palatable way, you can still have those flavors using whole foods, but you're a lot less likely to overeat, but also it resets your palate. So when the majority of your diet is made up of fruits, vegetables, and say let's pretend you got rid of any highly palatable processed food out of your diet for a month, your taste buds are going to change. you're going to be able to, like, they become more sensitive. You're going to taste the sweetness of fruit so much more. And even vegetables have a certain sweetness to them that you probably can't taste right now because you're so used to like ultra sweet. And it's amazing. I challenge you to try it. 30 days, remove all ultra processed foods out of your diet and just see how your taste buds change. Maybe your preferences will even change. I know, like, when I come out of a prep, my taste buds for sugar, it feels so strong. It almost feels like it burns my mouth. And after the last prep I had, like, I have had, I had one thing of crumble cookie, and it was just like too much for me. My mouth was burning, and it was delicious, of course. But then I was like, wow, actually, that felt. I wanted fruit. It was too strong. So if you just try it for 30 days, you might be amazed at how more sensitive you are to different flavors. And I think that's one thing too, is we have this issue with these strong flavors. There's actually a book on this called The Dorito Effect, and I've only I've only kind of gotten into it for like maybe a chapter, but it basically talks about how ultra processed food is kind of ruining our taste buds in the sense where we're expecting very strong flavors all the time. And then it makes it hard for us to taste real food, like fruits and vegetables, that sort of thing. It's very interesting. Highly recommend. I need to finish reading it though. Sorry about that tangent. So let's keep going on. Supportive environment. So surround yourself with people who encourage healthy eating habits. It's a lot harder to stay on track when you are surrounded by people who bring junk food in the house regularly, eat it in front of you, you're surrounded by it, and possibly encourage you to also indulge with them because peer pressure, right? And then FOMO. Those things are real, and it's hard to stay on track when you're experiencing that on the daily. So if you can, try to find a support system. The support system in your house is going to be huge. It's not impossible to improve your health if you're surrounded by people that are not so interested in that, but it's going to be harder for sure. So if you can make it a little easier on yourself, try to surround yourself with supportive people who are supportive of your goals and won't encourage you to indulge with them at the very least, all right? Another thing, last but not least, is professional help. So seek guidance from nutritionists, therapists, coaches. What's up? Shameless plug. If you need some accountability or guidance / direction. And I just want to, conclude this with knowing that it's not easy to stop eating these foods. And I think I always find it interesting. We're very hesitant to actually call it a food addiction. And I think it's because we have a hard time classifying food addiction amongst the other addictions, but the way that it acts in the brain is very similar. And although we don't have really like a physical withdrawal from these foods, definitely there's a mental one, because we miss that dopamine hit, right? So you got to find other ways to get it. But I think it's always interesting because we try to eat these foods in moderation, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but I don't know that it's always possible for everyone to eat these foods in moderation. And that's when you're going to have to know yourself and when you should seek professional help. Because, they are addictive. So you wouldn't just tell someone who's addicted to alcohol or heroin to have alcohol and heroin in moderation, right? Because that would be called a relapse. But for some reason, when it comes to food, we're just like, we tell people that it is unhealthy to remove these foods complete from their diet because then it is restrictive and unhealthy and you have orthorexia. And I'm going to be real. I have a hard time grasping the difference here. I might get canceled for that, but I'm just thinking out loud. Some food for thought. And the way that we approach like food addiction versus alcohol, drugs, that sort of thing, I don't understand why it is so different. And I know a lot of the biggest thing when it comes to food addiction, they say it's the hardest addiction because there's no other addiction that you need that addiction to survive. Like, you don't have to drink alcohol every day. You don't have to inject heroin into your body every day. After you get clean and stuff, you can die if you stop alcohol abruptly. But you always have to eat. And I think that's the part where people find it so hard. Just like, how do you beat a food addiction when you have to eat to survive? So, no, you can't stop eating, but you can stop eating the foods that are addictive, like these highly palatable processed foods. They are not a food group. Restricting or not eating highly palatable processed foods is not restricting one food group. It's just not eating highly palatable processed foods. You can still eat anything else you want except for those things. So that's just more of a curiosity question of, I know that there are some actual facilities that help with food addiction. There are support groups that do approach food addiction in the way, in a step program, much like Alcoholics Anonymous. But it's still very kind of small, very small percentage of people go that route. And they do actually consider, if someone goes and has some junk food as a relapse. I'm not a professional here, but I do think there is something there to be said about if you're having a hard time overeating highly palatable processed foods. Is it more harmful to take them away completely, or is it more harmful to just keep them in your diet in fear of restriction and being like, oh, you have an eating disorder now because you won't eat this food? But we don't need these foods to survive. I'm just talking in circles. Those are just my thoughts. And as a coach, I struggle. There's a lot of coaches out there nowadays, I feel like, emphasize being human and eating junk food. And there's nothing wrong with that, because I think there's definitely a need in showing people that, coaches, we are humans too. We are not perfect. We like to indulge in some junk food as well, on occasion. But I've seen the pendulum swing, because back in the day, we had a lot of things like paleo that we had some pretty popular restricted diets, keto, etc. So the pendulum always swings one way, and then it always swings the other way harder. We got to find that middle ground. Right now, we're like swinging the other way of being like, fuck all these diets that tell you not to eat XYZ. It's all fun and games, and we can eat everything in moderation. And that, is probably true for the majority of people. But I do feel like there is a certain percentage that maybe moderation doesn't work. I don't think moderation works for everybody. So, but it is something you have to know yourself. For myself, I cannot moderately really eat sweets. That's why I have my bogs. But if I kept like cookies or cinnamon rolls in my house, they would last about 2 seconds. I can't just have one. I would just want to eat the whole thing. So that's why you just got to know yourself. I am not special. I do not have more willpower than anyone else. I simply do not keep it in my house because I know myself. So, anyways, sorry about that tangent, but know yourself. Know your triggers. Know what you can handle. Know if you can have things in moderation. And if you can't, it's okay to test it out and see what you can handle and what you can't. If you can't seem to stop eating something, chances are at least leave it out of the house. All right. Okay. So I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks so much for listening. This was kind of a long one, unexpectedly. So yeah, but if you would like to leave a comment, you can now leave comments on Spotify, which is awesome. So if you feel so inclined, leave me a comment, or if you have a question. If you're watching this on YouTube, comment or questions, also very much so welcomed. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts and you'd like to leave a review, that would be awesome as well. If you want to share this with a friend that you think might find it helpful, I would absolutely appreciate that as well. So until next time, guys, peace out. I'll talk to you next time.